Greetings, dear friends. Your invaluable support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This greatly helps the growth of our channel. Leave your comments. Your feedback is very valuable to us. And now, to the most important and current world events. Let's go.
Something is burning again in the factory area. It's burning well.
A fire occurred in a boat manufacturing workshop in the industrial zone of Ufa. The fire was localized over an area of 800 square meters, reports the Ministry of Emergency Situations. There is no data on casualties. A black column of smoke is visible from several kilometers away. About 10 oxygen cylinders were removed from the building to prevent detonation. A mobile laboratory from Rospotrebnadzor was dispatched to the site to measure the concentration of harmful substances in the air. The main news on RBC with Nikita Gemiza in the studio. Ukrainian drones were destroyed near the site of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which houses the world's only full-scale reactor hull simulator. There are no casualties or destruction, and the Makoti inspectors are aware of the situation, according to the nuclear power plant's statement. Last night, air defense forces shot down 71 drones in 6 Russian regions, according to the Ministry of Defense. In the Kursk region, 49 UAVs were destroyed. In the Oryol and Ryazan regions, 7 drones each, 4 in the Bryansk region, 3 in the Vladimir region, and 1 in the Tula region. The authorities of these regions have not reported any casualties or destruction. The drone attack was repelled in the city of Shtuya in the Ivanovo region. A UAV attack alert was declared there at night. There were no casualties or destruction. Schools have switched to remote work mode, and duty groups have been organized in kindergartens. By spring, the Russian economy found itself at a turning point. Analysts are noting its slowdown. They point out that this can be considered a deliberate cooling. At the same time, no clear threats to budget stability are observed. These are the conclusions of the economists from the rating agency Expert RA. They presented 2 scenarios for the Russian economy for this year. The first optimistic scenario, where inflation slows down to 6.57% by the end of the year and the key rate decreases to 18-19% by December. I would like to note that the February medium-term forecast by the central bank suggested that inflation would be 7 to 8% by the end of the year. In this scenario, the process of economic slowdown will be quite inertial. By the end of the year, GDP growth may be 1.5% and 2.2% the following year. Analysts call this scenario a soft landing. The second additional stroke. It takes into account the strengthening of inflation. The prerequisites for this may include, in particular, the recovery of the credit impulse, increased government spending, rising inflation expectations among the population and businesses, as well as reduced uncertainty in the global economy or the easing of the sanctions regime. In this case, the central bank may tighten monetary policy and maintain the key rate at 21% until December. Then the economy will face near zero growth, and the priority sectors for the budget will even experience negative growth. The main sector that is holding back economic development, according to the authors of the Expert.Rus study, is construction. High rates and restrictions on state support have already led to a decline in launch volumes. New projects. The main damage is borne by organizations that supply materials and equipment. Other analysts insist that the extractive sector can also be included in this list. It points to a reduction in production on an annual basis in metallurgy and oil refining. Methods of regulating offline trade are outdated. It is necessary to revise the approaches that were relevant in the 90s and 2000s. Participants of the plenary session of the Information Technology Conference came to this conclusion. It is taking place in Moscow. The Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, in particular, acknowledged that small businesses are actively moving to online platforms because they offer better conditions compared to offline. Against this backdrop, the popularity of regular stores is declining. The deputy head of the presidential administration, Maxim Oreshkin, in turn, noted that deregulating offline would help ensure fair competition in the market.
When we look at the regulation of offline and online trade, in which direction should we move? It is very important to remember here that there is no perfect regulation. And when the world changes, regulation must change along with it. The legislation on offline trade that we had in the 90s and 2000s was about that era, those technologies, that economic structure. Now, all these things have changed. So we need to take a new look at how regulation is done and examine it. What kind of offline trade regulation on one hand will correspond to the current moment, and on the other hand, will ensure fair competition between offline and online.
Let me remind you, the Russian e-commerce market grew by 41% just last year, reaching 9 trillion rubles. Online commerce is actively spreading not only in large cities, but also in small settlements. At the conference, it was once again emphasized that this type of trade allows producers from the most remote corners of Russia to access markets across the country. More than 10 million Russians have imposed a self-ban on loans. This is according to data from the National Bureau of Credit Histories. The ability to set a self-ban became available at the beginning of spring. In the first month, about 8 million people used it. Another 2 million in the first weeks of April. Most often, the self-ban was set by residents of Moscow and the surrounding region. In the capital region, almost 2 million people. Also at the top of the list are 500,000 residents of St. Petersburg and 300,000 residents each from the Rozluzskaya region and Bashkiria. As a rule, self-bans on loans were most often arranged for children and elderly parents, according to the Association of Russian Banks. In this way, Russians are also trying to protect themselves from fraudsters. This is also confirmed by the research data from VTB. The bank conducted a survey on self-bans, and 83% of respondents said that the service would help them protect their money from fraudsters. At the same time, 70% of respondents believe that self-ban services are most relevant for those who have already experienced financial losses. More than half of the surveys. It is believed that such services will most often be used by elderly people and those prone to impulsive spending. Residents of large cities participated in the VTB survey. I remind you, you can set restrictions on obtaining a loan online through the State Services Portal or at the MFC. To cancel the self-ban, you will have to contact the Credit History Bureau, again through State Services. The Prosecutor General's office has filed a lawsuit against Wintershall DA, once the largest oil and gas corporation in Germany and Europe. The appeal was submitted to the Moscow Arbitration Court. The list of defendants, BIA, lists the legal bureau Aurelius Koto, and 3 international lawyers. One acted as an arbitrator in the Court of Arbitration for Sport in cases related to disputes between Russia and WADA. The lawsuit was filed in the Moscow court but is not accepted for proceedings. The Prosecutor General's office's demands are unavailable. However, third parties are involved in the case. These include Gazprom, the Russian Ministry of Energy, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Wintershall Dea was a co-owner in 3 joint ventures with Gazprom in Yamal. The corporation was an investor in Nord Stream 2 with a 15.5% share. January 2023, it withdrew from Russia. Losses estimated over 5 billion euros. December, Vladimir Putin signed decrees where the rights and obligations of the joint ventures were transferred to enterprises created by the government. Wintershall Dea initiated 2 arbitration proceedings against Russia, claiming that its assets were forcibly taken, and appealed to the treaty between Russia and Germany on mutual investment protection. The Kremlin stated that the decrees do not mean that foreign companies' assets are being seized. Last fall, Wintershall Dea ceased to exist. Its oil and gas enterprises in 8 countries were bought by the British company Harbour Energy. The trade war with the USA will cost the European Union more than €1 trillion over 4 years. This follows from the results of a study by the German Economic Institute on the consequences of Donald Trump's customs policy. For Germany alone, the confrontation with the USA could cost approximately €300 billion. This is more than 1.5% of the country's GDP per year. The publication Handelsblatt writes that developing countries with emerging market economies will suffer the most. China is trying to strengthen economic cooperation with the European Union to offset losses from the trade conflict with Washington and redirect export flows, writes the Financial Times. According to the newspaper, the Chinese authorities have intensified their search for buyers in Europe and have sent trade delegations to European capitals, including Stockholm, Budapest, and London. At the same time, China's relations with the EU are complicated by trade imbalances, limited access for European companies to the Chinese market, and political disagreements, the publication notes. The United Kingdom will not cut trade ties with Beijing and will continue to develop relations with it, despite US attempts to pressure China through third countries. This is reported by the British publication The One Paper. According to its information, London will resist the actions of the United States, which intends to achieve isolation of the Chinese economy. I remind you the day before, the Wall Street Journal reported that Washington hopes to persuade other countries to limit trade ties with China in exchange for reducing tariffs in the US. At the same time, the White House expects that a trade deal with Britain will be concluded in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The terms of it were not disclosed. The first round of negotiations between the US and Japan in Washington regarding a possible reduction of American tariffs ended, without an agreement being signed, Bloomberg reports. Currently, the parties are preparing for the second round, which will take place in April. Tokyo will primarily seek a revision of tariffs on cars, steel, and aluminum, stated Japan's Minister for Economic Revitalization. We will continue to monitor the developments, and now on air is Day Main.
Stay tuned to RBC.